the hip hop genre in general. And here's a very interesting article, how American pop music, according to researchers, have been largely influenced more than by any other influence, hip-hop. Hip-hop is number one, has even outstripped the influence of the Beatles on the American music genre. Incredible the influence. And the way it's taken the full pop music scene in just the last 15, 20 years. This zeitgeist is blowing at 140, make that 440 miles an hour, and it's affecting just about every part of American life. And welcome, friends, to the Generations broadcast. Kevin Swanson, your host with you today. Adam McManus, our co-host. He is also the host on theworldview.com, which is our daily 5 to 7 to 8 to 10 to 12 minute news update. Adam, I don't always get it quite right, but at least we're trying to give a biblical worldview-based news update on a daily basis to you from the generations.org ministry. And Adam, we appreciate the work that you've done on this, and certainly the level of support we've gotten for our broadcasts, both the Worldview and Generations, has been remarkable this year. We're so thankful that the troops have showed up to keep us going with our media efforts, trying to bring a distinctively biblical worldview into the area of media and news. Very, very rare, extremely rare today where you find the Word of God actually applied to the issues of the day. And that's the sort of thing we want to do with this news update that we've done for, 10 years now?
That's right. Our goal was $123,500 to cover the costs of the 6-member Worldview newscast team, and ultimately listeners donated upwards of $126,000. We're very grateful for God's provision, for the sacrifice of the people, whether they gave $10 or as one person did $4,000 and another gave $12,000. We are truly humbled by their vote of confidence, recognizing the importance of accurate news, biblical perspective. We include compelling sound bites and oftentimes action steps on how you can get involved, holding a company accountable for unbiblical practices, a company accountable, commending them, really thanking them for Christian positions. And even we can call congressmen or legislators in various states, thanking them or encouraging them to support or oppose a given bill.
Yeah, and, there's not that much in terms of Christian news out there, especially that which acknowledges God as sovereign, as Jesus, King of Kings, over all the presidents of the world, including the President of the United States, and to apply biblical law to various ethical issues of the day, which is exactly what we do with the Generations broadcast and the Christian Worldview newscast that we present each and every day. And friends, we're just trying to bring a biblical worldview to bear. Of course, that was the predominant worldview in the Western world for a very long time. Now it's basically upheld by the 0.001% of the news that is out there today. Not very many newscasts will acknowledge God, Jesus Christ as King of Kings, and the Word of God as the source of wisdom and knowledge. And so that's the sort of thing we want to do. We want to bring a biblical Christian worldview back into a world that is largely absent of it. And we're up against, $100 billion of media out there, and we're just trying to raise, $100,000 or so to keep a Christian worldview perspective somewhat available to the Christian remnant that is still here in the United States and around the world. We have listeners from all over the world that tune in to us.
I was thrilled to receive even donations from Sweden, Japan, and a number from the former Swaziland country in Africa, where I did the extrapolation for them to have given $30. It's like an American giving $650. It was quite sacrificial.
Huge. Well, today we're getting back to pop culture, which is really a dominant force in so much of the church today. So much of the Western culture. Pop culture, of course, dominates and effectively is the source of instruction and a worldview that is imposed and inculcated by the masses. And here, Forbes magazine, just in 2017, said hip hop was the, quote, dominant musical genre in the U.S. music industry. By 2017, not so. In 2007, not so much, of course, in 1997, 1987, or 1957 for that matter. But by the time you get to early 1990s, hip-hop, rap, and the extensive use of the F word pretty much dominated American culture at that point. Here, it says a controversial issue in rap and hip-hop culture since its inception has been the violence, aggression of its hardcore styles, the prevalence of misogyny, sexism, sexual violence in the lyrics of the most popular gangsta rap lyrics triggered public debate about obscenity in the mid-1990s, went all the way to the U.S. Senate. The most popular artists in the world, and this is from Wikipedia, by the way, this is not a Christian news site at all, but according to Wikipedia, the most popular artists in the world have sold hundreds of millions of albums, speaking approvingly of choking girlfriends to death, raping people, raping close relatives, murdering girlfriends with impunity. It's just, I will say, Adam, it's the most disgusting forms of culture that have ever been produced, I think, in the history of mankind, and the form itself has become universal. So, you know, whoever came up with these styles, this approach to music, has effectively dominated the culture of the modern day. And the reason this topic, I think, is interesting to Christians is because this musical genre has come to dominate not just pop music, but country music, even Christian pop in the 2010s and 2020s. So, you know, concerned about it. And of course, the Diddy trial just completed a day or two before this thing has reached our listening audience. And Adam, I would say that it's, you know, disgusting I mean, it's been on the front page of the news for at least 6 months now. I have done my best not to click on the news story because I don't particularly want to be defiled. And I don't think anybody else wants to be defiled by any of these stories. Now, effectively, what Diddy did was he lived up to the music he produced. So, you know, they present this approach to music, this cultural emanation, and they basically live up to the words that they put into their rap lyrics. And this, my friends, is extremely troubling. Certainly, it's absolutely disgusting. And of course, we're to have no fellowship whatsoever with the unfruitful works of darkness. But at the point that hip hop, rap, etc., has moved its way from these progenitors who are evidently very much in favor of rape and murder and mayhem and vengeance and raping close relatives, choking girlfriends to death, et cetera, when we bring that form into Christian music, I think somebody needs to throw the flag on the play and say, now, wait a minute, you know, perhaps this may not be the best form of culture ever developed in the history of mankind. Perhaps this is one of the very worst forms of culture that has ever been produced by human beings on planet Earth. And so I think somebody just needs to say that. And I think at this point, the whole thing is about ready to collapse within a few years. These sorts of fads fade away quickly, and this one's going to go away pretty quick.
I'd like to make 3 points. Number one, when Two Live Crew first came out in 1990, they were the first one, and the name of their album was Banned in the USA. It was the first album in hip-hop to receive the now standard black and white warning label that read parental advisory, explicit lyrics. And they wore that particular label with pride. In fact, rappers subsequent to Two Live Crew in 1990 aspired to have that same label put on their album because it would assure them, because it's the forbidden fruit, as it were, of greater sales. In that vein, Tipper Gore, the wife of former Vice President Al Gore, did something that I really appreciated. She spoke in a number of congressional hearings asking for legitimate restraint on the part of these lyrics. And what could Congress do? I don't remember the specific outcomes. Maybe it was just the label itself. But I remember she said these kinds of lyrics that are demeaning, degrading, actually urging sexual assault, as you've referenced in a number of cases, are a terrible output into our culture, and we should do our best, our level best, to speak out against it. Number two, this particular genre, this hip-hop genre, which celebrates the most degrading, in the toilet bowl kind of lyrics and worldview reminds me of another genre that America itself is known for, and I think we might have even invented, and that's the horror genre in the world of movies, where you purposely are trying to frighten people with disturbing graphic images, and it's often tied into sex and sexual assault. And what those horror movies often do, from the Friday the 13th franchise to every other one you can imagine, Freddy Krueger, all of that, they train young boys in the beginnings of their adolescence, when the testosterone is coursing through their veins, to become titillated by this combination of violence with sexual imagery, with a young man and woman engaging in sexual immorality, and then the monster, whoever the monster is, kills one or both of them, and that combination is actually training, on some percentage level, future rapists, which is horrifying. And then the third comment I would make is about the P. Diddy trial in and of itself. This is a man who was at the top of the hip-hop genre, and he was very wealthy because of it. But as you said, he lived out in his own private life the very words and the philosophies that he championed in the musical content. And he wasn't just about his own musical output. He also managed groups and produced other groups which did the same. This man was involved in prostitution, sexual assault, kidnapping, drugs, probably things involving minors. I mean, the fact that he was only found guilty on one particular count, if I'm not mistaken, of prostitution and getting 10 years is, frankly, compared to what he really was guilty of, a relative slap on the wrist. There were, sadly, champions outside his trial each and every day for months that were singing his praises. And I think that both the support that he got at the trial outside the courtroom itself, and the lack of real prosecution of the crimes that he was guilty of, is a further indictment, Kevin, of our American culture and how far adrift we've fallen from God's best for us.
Well, I would guess the reason why he's getting 10 years, and that's maximum. My guess is going to be closer to 2, 3, or 4, or 5 years when the sentencing happens. But my guess is that you've got several things happening. One is that the American culture absolutely embraces almost every form of sexual perversion, and that goes all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And then secondly, there's a lot of wokeism involved in all of this as well, in which, and also just the pop star element. Sometimes that will somewhat protect a person from being prosecuted. Just the powerful position that they happen to find themselves in is a means whereby they defend themselves and are exonerated from some of these charges. So I would guess that some of that plays into this particular trial. And the bottom line is that American jurisprudence and the American moral system or ethical system absolutely has jettisoned any notion of a biblical ethic at this point. So I mean, that's just the bottom line. But Diddy was charged with multiple felonies in areas of drug use, sex trafficking, prostitution, arson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there are scads of these sorts of scandals, right down to murders and rape and all these other things. I think I was looking on one website, there were 20 scandals connected with the hip hop industry, and almost it was a badge of honor to get arrested and to be seen as the bad boy for the hip-hop industry. In fact, one of the articles I picked up from Yahoo News, Diddy Depravity, How Hip-Hop's Culture of Silence Helped Hide Its Biggest Bad Boy. So that was a Yahoo News article that came out just, I think, back in last September. But I want to take a break, and when I come back, the hip-hop genre in general. And here's a very interesting article how American pop music, according to researchers, have been largely influenced more than by any other influence, hip-hop. Hip-hop is number one, has even outstripped the influence of the Beatles on the American music genre. Incredible the influence. And the way it's taken the full pop music scene in just the last 15, 20 years. This zeitgeist is blowing at 140, make that 440 miles an hour. And it's affecting just about every part of American life. Could you ever imagine that what started out as a parental advisory problem in the early 1990s has turned out to be the dominant cultural force in the 2020s? Incredible. This is Kevin Swanson. Be back in just a moment on Generations. The world is filled with irresponsible men, heartless men, treacherous men, dishonorable men, passive men. God is looking you straight in the eye, man, and he's saying, I'm calling you. Brothers, God is discipling us even as we are discipling our children, loving our children, investing in them. Before you ask the purpose for your life, you need to ask yourself, who are you? I'm the servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. He's given me a reason. He's given me a mission for what I'm supposed to do here on planet Earth. Disciple the nations. Begin with your own family. God calls you to be strong. This is the quintessential definition of a manly character in the Bible. God calls us to be strong. God calls us to be consistent, resilient, to stay in the battle, no matter the obstacle, no matter the demonic opposition set against you. It means we're not intimidated by the enemy because God's not intimidated. Calling you to that. And we are back on the Generations broadcast. Kevin Swanson with you, Adam McManus as well, dealing with cultural issues. And friends, nothing influences the world, our world today, like pop culture. Forget the Supreme Court of the United States. Forget the President of the United States. Forget the bully pulpits. They don't do anything, hardly, compared to the influence of Sean Diddy Combs and his ilk. Indeed, that's the what forms our ideas, our ethical priorities. The morality of the nation, more and more formed by the pop culture stars of the day, much as Diddy. Now, I'll say that this is something of a hit on hip-hop, but my guess is that the genre is not going to be affected that much. It's interesting to me that the hip-hop genre would put as many as 300 to 800 expletives on an album. Within 60 minutes, you're getting 800 expletives. I would say that's the max. Terrible. Sometimes upwards of 300-400, which comes out to, I think I figured, close to one every 4 to 5 seconds. You've got some form of expletive, and again, the preferable expletive is typically the F word. But then that, of course, now has eked into the way in which most pop culture stars are putting together their albums today. So it's not just the hip hop and rap genre, but the pop genre itself is completely full of expletives, and that includes Taylor Swift and others that lead the charts in the present day. So again, it's the hip hop culture that has had so much influence. Sean Diddy Combs has presented himself as a key example of the kind of lifestyle that is encouraged and the kind of abuse that is advanced and promoted by this industry. And it's pretty much the bottom of the barrel when it comes to any kind of culture. I would say even the heathen cultures, the pagan cultures of some of the most distant nations in the world from a Christian faith would have been ashamed at some of the things that have been produced by the hip-hop culture of our generation.
Examples of what has happened in the hip-hop culture as a result of these terrible lyrics that not only celebrate sexual immorality, but absolute depravity and violence. the deaths of Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac Shakur in March 9th, 1997 and September 13th, 1996, respectively. They had apparently some kind of rap feud, leading both artists to be gunned down within 6 months of each other. It was kind of a East-West versus West, excuse me, it was an East Coast versus a West Coast beef that they had, and for that, they lost their lives. And then there was Chris Brown in February of 2009, the night before the Grammys. He assaulted Rihanna in a vehicle so badly that she had visible bruises all over her face and body. It was an argument in his Lamborghini, ironically enough, over his alleged unfaithfulness to their relationship and becoming involved with other women. And she was upset, held him to account for it, and he responded in violence, ultimately pled guilty to a charge of felony assault in June of 2007. Eminem is another example, the white rapper who often used his albums to champion terrible words, lyrics that talked about killing and hurting and assaulting his own wife. I mean, just the person that does this, I mean, the Bible references that you can get to a point where your conscience becomes seared. And I think that's what we're talking about with these people. They are clearly marinating their minds in pornography, in very violent pornography. They're acting it out. They have this pedestal. They're, making money hand over fist in the millions of dollars. And they figure, I'm just going to keep feeding this machine because this is how I'm getting wealthier and more famous. And then it all comes back to bite them. And maybe beyond personally leading to their own demise, in the case of these two rappers that were actually killed. But I mean, think about what the impact is in our culture at large when someone like Eminem or any of these rapper stars talks about hurting, sexually assaulting, or hurting the people closest to them. It gives permission to young adolescents and 20-something-year-olds to do the same with the people closest to them.
Well, I think we need to be aware of the trends. Certainly, the Bible says, hey, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. That's the culture that is absolutely essential for the Christian mind. And so what we have here is a trend, and again, this is, we're looking at people who have sold hundreds of millions of albums. Eminem at the very top, perhaps the most popular of the male stars that are still around today that represent pop music over the last, say, 25 years. And this is not Johnny Horton, Battle of New Orleans. This is not Bing Crosby, White Christmas, number one in the nation back in 1937. This is not how much is that doggy in the window. Okay, we're a little beyond that. I mean, I think would be perhaps the most obvious thing I could say on a program like this. Does anybody sense that perhaps things have changed a bit since how much is that doggy in the window? Or I used to say, one of my favorite songs from back in the 90s was how my grandfather's clock is too large for the shelf. I mean, back in the 1890s. It was number one in the 1890s. They sold it in sheet music back then. So those are the sorts of things that I like to bring out simply because there's a trend going on here, but not just a trend. We're not just looking at one of the most devastating civilization-ruining trends in the history of the world. That's a chapter that I put in my book, Epoch, The Rise and Fall of the West. But it's also a dominant form. And this comes from another article, American pop music over the last half century, according to a new study by researchers in Britain, indicates that hip-hop, not the Beatles, have triggered the most important evolution in American pop music. That's based on a digital analysis of chord patterns, tonal shifts, and other audio features. Lyrics were not considered. So they're not even considering lyrics. They're just looking at the musical style. They looked at 17,000 songs in the U.S. pop charts between 1960 and 2010. Really phenomenal. And the explosion of hip-hop rap music in 1991, far more auditory influence on the popular songs than followed the British invasion of the Beatles in 1964 or the synth pop surge of 1983. The other 2 years that saw big shifts in music styles, according to researchers at Queen Mary University, Imperial College, London. Researchers dissected the musical elements of the songs, created categories that resemble genres using last.fm, user tags hip-hop, rap, gangster rap, old school, etc., etc. Hip-hop is the single greatest revolution in the U.S. pop charts by far, said Armand Leroy, 50 years old, a professor of evolutionary development biology of Imperial College, London. The finding challenges mainstream perceptions that the 1960s British invasion of the Beatles marked pop's most significant development of the last half century. These guys analyzed 30-second snippets pulled from 17,094 songs, representing 86% of all the singles that charted on Billboard Hot 100 during the 50-year scope of the study. Incredible. They tossed traditional genre classification aside, instead looked at differences in chords, rhythms, tonal pop properties, and assigned each song to one of the 13 groups based on the patterns they found. Then, like evolutionary biologists who chart the differences among species in nature, they looked at diversity in pop music. When did it shift most rapidly, et cetera, et cetera. The U.S. release of the Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand on December 26, 1963 may get too much credit for starting the revolution. The real revolution actually came through the hip-hop and the utterly destructive form that was brought upon the entire world in the early 1990s and has become almost omnipresent. If you think about it, you hear it everywhere. It's made its way into country music. You know, listen to country music. That's rap. What are they rapping for? What's all this hip-hop coming into country music all about? It's in Christian pop. It's everywhere. It is omnipresent today, and that's the point these guys make, is that, hey, at the very least, step back and say, this is the most influential, powerful force of the modern zeitgeist of the last 50, 60 years in pop culture. That being the case, at least we should all wake up and realize that's what happened to us. That's all I'm saying.
When I pull up to a given stop sign or stoplight in my minivan with my kids in tow, and my windows are rolled down on the occasion when it's cool enough in San Antonio not to have the air conditioning going, I'm inevitably next to a car with their windows rolled down, and they're blasting this hideous hip-hop music for two reasons I call it hideous. Number one, the lyrics are profane. They use the F word nonstop. They even use the N word in kind of a slangy sort of way, which I find equally offensive. But also the beat itself, the music, your study that you just cited is fascinating because they were not even looking at the lyrics. They were looking at the tonality and how the sound comes across versus how music has traditionally been communicated with delightful melodies. And what I do is something called classical revenge. An interesting play on words. And what I do is I turn up as loud as my little minivan speakers will allow me, classical music. And I roll down my windows, and so I've got Beethoven's Fifth Symphony blaring, and I say, what do you think of that? And of course they can't even hear it because their music is so loud, so they've got to turn down their music. And I said, what? And then they finally hear my music. What do you think of that? And they said, it sounds terrible. See, they're as offended by my music as I am by their music. And I said, well, I think your music is terrible, especially they're using the F word. It's just terribly profane. Can you not play that so loudly? Needless to say, my children, 15, 13, and 10, are sinking in the seats out of somewhat embarrassment. But I would add another interesting comment. When I watch America's Got Talent, the big talent show, I am intrigued by how often these beautiful young singers who have presented a ballad and they're in the middle of it, like 30 seconds, a minute into a 3-minute song, and all of a sudden they break out into some kind of hip-hop rap. The melody goes away that was so delightful, the words I could understand go away, and instead we've got this rap in the middle of their beautiful ballad. And I'm thinking, and what's fascinating to me, Kevin, is that the 10,000 people in the audience stand to their feet, they're clapping, they're cheering, they're thrilled because they think that trumps the ballad they were just previously singing. That shows you the influence of hip hop in the American culture.
Hip hop is the idiom. It's the only idiom. It's the predominant and prominent idiom that dominates our culture in the present day. Now, you bring up the issue of melody, and this is a point I make in my book, Epoch, the rise and fall of culture in the West. And I have a short segment on this because it's not. I wasn't the first to come up with this, but I traced it in my book Epoch: The Rise and Fall of the West. Now listen. Here's what I wrote. The history of popular music could very well tell the story of the slow but steady disappearance of the melody. The most popular song in 1942 was "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas." The melody was distinct. Most popular song in 1949 was Ghost Riders in the Sky, a melody with a moral and a warning about hell. Then came Heartbreak Hotel in 1956, a revolutionary change in music, a bluesy song with more beat than melody. Elvis Presley's antics may have been sexualized, but more essentially, the form was pure energy, primitive. The Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand, most popular song in 1964, introduced the jangle sound, a term describing this as discordant, harsh, and unpleasant. The tune was tantalizingly close to some sort of melody, except that the boy band from Liverpool sounded out of tune, dissonant, and obviously uncommitted to the tune. The sheer defiance in the form, the sexual tension, the preeminence of the rock and roll beat took the world by storm. Marvin Gaye's 1973 Let's Get It On sticks with a melody for 3 or 4 notes at a time, accommodating the sexual revolution of the day, punctuated with screeching, shearing, and howling. There was no melody left in 1984 with Prince's When Doves Cry. The funk style, early predecessor to hip-hop, abandoned chord progressions and melody for pure high-energy bassline rhythm. By the 2010s, the vocalists would hover around a single note, and we weren't sure if they were yelling, rapping, or singing. The melody was all gone. Human personality was dispensed with. The music was reduced to a monotonous dembo rhythm, usually delivered in a highly synthesized mechanical techno sound. Any computer could program itself and run through the hypnotic loops. So, friends, that's another example of how that happened.
Right.
Nothing in human history could compare with the sheer primal energy generated by this modern pop form. Charles Reich wrote approvingly of the revolutionary character of the medium in 1970. Not even the turbulent fury of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony can compete for sheer energy with the Rolling Stones. It was a music that rocks the whole body. So again, friends, that was it. It was pure sensation, and it was the complete abandonment of melody because the melody was obsolete. It was no further need for it, not for the modern man who had pretty much given way to the Dionysius urge. Okay, so that's the history, and I present quite a bit more of it in my book, Epoch: The Rise and Fall of the West. You can get a copy, of course, at generations.org to read that full chapter. That is one of the most interesting chapters in the book. You know what's interesting also, let me close on this one just for a moment. Back in 2013, several seminary presidents did extensive defenses of rap music and hip-hop.
What?
One was included in the Aquila report by Ligon Duncan, and that was, 12, 13 years ago. Issuance of apologies for comments on the part of pastors who had criticized the form. So these pastors had criticized the rap form, the hip-hop form, and a number of seminary presidents, and there's actually a couple of them, the writings of defending this form on the internet today. But here's the point. The point is now we're 13 years away from that. At the time, it was very popular, and it was politically incorrect for anybody to critique what was happening with the hip-hop genre. Despite the fact that it had such horrible legacy. But then there was, an attempt to redeem the form. That was the point that some of these seminary professors, I think, were trying to make. But Shai Linne's last album was 7 years ago. The other Calvinistic rapper, Christian rapper, Lecrae, you've probably heard of Lecrae. He's taken a hard left, moving towards sort of the me-centered themes relating to victimhood, man-focused wokeism. That's making up his lyrics these days. And he prefers political candidates that are socialist and promise to fix poverty over candidates that want to use the civil magistrate to curtail abortion and go after criminal behavior. So now he hasn't been on the charts to amount to anything since 2015, 2016, 2017, which was the heyday for Christian rap and certainly reformed Christian rap. But again, the fad fades quickly, very, very quickly. And it was, I think, a bit embarrassing that these seminary professors had to rush out there and defend the form with everything they had back in 2012, 2013 timeframe. But I think, again, mass ignorance on the part of so many of our Christian leaders today, especially when it comes to this issue of cultural symbols. Cultural symbols absolutely matter. They bear heavy connotation. We can't be idiots about it when it comes to culture. And, I have been somewhat criticized in the past by the grotesqueness of this illustration, but it turns out to be the best illustration for what's happening today. And you probably have heard it before, Adam. It's the youth leader that runs off into a hip-hop concert or a modern pop music concert in the secular realm and finds out that one of the cool things that they do is lift the middle finger. So this is a cultural form that he gets all excited about. So he brings it back into his youth group, and during the praise and worship session, he says, let's all lift the middle finger. So let's just do this. Now, this is a story. It's granted it maybe feel just a bit exaggerated, but he takes the cultural form, whether it be the music form or whether it be just the form used in hand symbols. But he takes this obnoxious, horrible, profane, obscene gesture, okay? He brings it into the praise and worship and encourages everybody in the youth group to lift their middle finger during the praise and worship. Okay, so he's bringing the form into the praise and worship with the intent to redeem the form, okay? His whole idea is to redeem the form. Okay, now that's just stupid to do something like that. I'm guessing that even seminary professors would probably admit that that's a bad idea.
I would hope so.
I would hope so. I mean, this idea that, we're just going to redeem hip hop and rap and lifting the middle finger and do whatever they do in these pagan concerts and drag it into the praise and worship and pretend like everything's okay. So ridiculous. This thing is shameful. It's so ignorant. And I think it comes down to the fact that people aren't thinking through these things very well. In fact, I think at some point, Christians just have to not be an idiot when it comes to using cultural forms. For the same reason, I'm not going to be preaching with a Playboy bunny on my T-shirt, okay? It's just not happening. Why? Because you just can't redeem these cultural forms, at least right away, because the connotations are too strong, too deep, and the symbols at times can be redeemed. But I was even talking to my children about this. I said, what about the Nazi symbol? At this point in Germany, if somebody puts a Nazi symbol on their social media account, they get arrested and they get thrown in jail for it. Well, evidently, it's going to be tough to redeem the Nazi symbol, cultural symbol, in the German culture over a period of what's been 70, 80 years since the death of the Third Reich. So again, friends, symbols, can they be redeemed? Well, occasionally. We're trying to redeem the rainbow, certainly. The rainbow actually belonged to us to begin with, so let's remember that.
They took it from us.
Let's remember that. They stole it from us.
I would mention that you referenced Lecrae. I had never heard of him. There was a mega church here in San Antonio that held a big July 4th event with fireworks and food and rides. And so, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, I took my children to it, and they said, and there's going to be a concert by a Christian rapper. And I thought, well, that sounds strange, a Christian rapper. And so, we had gone to the rides and we had eaten the food, and the fireworks were going to go off in a matter of an hour when the sun went down. But out comes this Christian rapper, Lecrae, and I thought, what is going on? Between the beat and the lyrics, which were very borderline, I thought, this is really weird to me. Why is a church hiring him, paying him obviously thousands of dollars to be the star entertainment draw for the evening? I mean, I'd never heard of him. I was there for the food and the fireworks, not for Lecrae, whom I'd never heard of. And I looked around, and the people were responding with hugely positive affirmation in terms of clapping and cheering. And I thought, there is something wrong with this picture.
Yeah, and I remember watching a Christian rapper at a church, I think it was in Canada. I was watching the YouTube of this particular rapper performing at this evangelical church, might have even been a Reformed church of some sort up in Canada. And the guy kept grabbing for his crotch, which is...
Please.
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Michael Jackson is enough.
Yeah, and it's common among the pop stars. And again, another cultural form that's being dragged into the church, and
Right.
and I'm thinking, okay, you're trying to bring this into the praise and worship or into the church. Does anybody see a disconnect here? Does anybody see that this is a cultural form
a slight one.
that we're going to have a hard time bringing this into the church? And people have used the excuse that Martin Luther has used bar tunes, etc. Somebody did a full analysis of the tunes that Martin Luther had used, and there was only one that was used in folk culture of his day. And he later had a conscience about it and replaced that tune with his own tune. So he really was being cautious. And there's an entire article on this and online you can find. But he was very careful not to bring pagan forms into the Christian worship. But to develop his own. And so, friends, we've got to be ever so careful, not just the words. I'm not just talking about lyrics here. I'm talking about the form itself. We have to be extremely careful, especially when we're in the midst of a revolution in which we are seeing a total destruction of culture and civilization. And friends, I would encourage you to my book, Epoch, The Rise and Fall of the West, especially my chapter on the rise and fall of Western civilization and the rise and fall of Western culture. Be sure to read those and understand that we are in the midst of a total wreck, a total disaster, a demolition of entire culture. It's at this point at which I think we all need to throw a flag on the play and say, you know what, we're going to have to think twice before we drag these forms into the Christian church, into the Christian family, into the Christian way of life. Because do remember, it's not just the lyrics. It's also the form. The form can contradict the message itself. And I've given a number of illustrations of that before as well on this broadcast. You can get more of it in my book, The Tattooed Jesus, What the Real Jesus Would Do with Pop Culture. I actually do have a short chapter on hip-hop. But check out my book on pop culture. It's called The Tattooed Jesus, What the Real Jesus Would Do with Pop Culture, available at generations.org. This is Kevin Swanson inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation.